Alright, hey guys, how's it going? This is Mark from visualeffectspro.com, and in this tutorial we're going to be using some blood textures that we just released for free, and we're going to be using Element 3D in After Effects to composite together this bathroom scene that has these bloody footprints and these blood spattered all around the floor. Alright, and just to show you these blood textures, we got 5 categories in there. We got blood that's smeared, we got some blood splatter, we got some footprints with different intensities of blood, we also got some handprints, again some more smeared than others, and we also got one dripping blood element. We're also going to be using some of our premium blood splatter visual effects elements that you can find on our website. So just a quick overview of what we're going to be doing. We're gonna work on creating this 3D scene first of all in Element 3D, and we're gonna use Blender to bake in some displacement into our textures because you can't do displacement in Element 3D. After that, we're gonna work on our lighting, which is very important for this scene because you want it to be quite a dramatic scene, and lighting is a big effect on that. Once we finish that, we're gonna work on our blood elements, and because we are using Element 3D, we can easily perfectly have them in the right 3D space, including accurate depth of field. And lastly, we're going to add a quick color grade, and then that's the final result. Alright, so let's dive straight into it. I'm gonna come into my tutorial composition. I'm gonna create a new solid by pressing Ctrl and Y and just call it Element 3D. Press enter. The color of the solid doesn't matter. You're gonna find element in your effects and presets, drag it onto the solid. Then after this, I've used some textures downloaded from Quixel, and I'll show you how to make them into 3D objects, because in Element 3D you can't use displacement. So you first have to bake that in and then use that as a 3D model in Element 3D. So I'm gonna open up Blender. I'm gonna press A and X and delete everything. Then press Shift and A, go mesh and plane. Then I'm gonna press Tab, right click on my mouse and subdivide. Gonna subdivide it by maybe 25. Then I'm gonna press tab again to go out of edit mode. Come into the modifier properties. I'm gonna add a displace modifier. Then I'm gonna come down to texture and press on new. Come down to the texture properties, then press open. Then you need to find the displacement map for your texture that looks like this. Then go back to your modifier properties and add a subdivision surface. Then you have to move this above your displace, decrease the strength to around 0.1. Then you can increase the number of subdivisions in your viewport to kind of see a preview. Usually around 5 should be enough. Then you want to also do it for your render, so go up to 5 or more if you'd like. Then, so we need to export this as an OBJ. So I'm going to press File, Export as a wavefront OBJ. Alright, then I'm going to come back to Element 3D, go into Scene Setup, and in here I'm going to press on Import. Then import your 3D model that you just made, and I'm going to leave everything as it is. Press OK. Then it appears very smooth, so you can press on Normalize Size. So this is our texture baked in with the displacement. So now we can go ahead and add the textures. Drop this down and come into the texture, then add the diffuse, and it's sometimes called albedo, and press OK and do the rest for the grossness, the normal map, and the occlusion. And if your 3D model requires a refractivity, then you can also use the refraction map. So I've imported these 4 textures. I'm gonna reduce the grossness to 100. When you export it from Blender, it comes as a 500%. You just want to decrease it to 100%. Then let's see what we got. I'm gonna press OK. There's your 3D model of the floor. Then I'm going to create a camera to move around in the 3D scene. So we're gonna press Ctrl, Shift, Alt, and C. Or you can also come up here to Layer, New, and Camera. You want a 2-node camera. I'm going to use a kind of a wider focal length. Before moving in my 3D scene, I'm going to make a null. So I'm going to press Ctrl, Shift, Alt, and Y. Or again, you can come up to Layer, New, and Null Object. I'm going to make it in 3D. And I'm going to copy the position of this camera and paste it into my null. I'm going to call it Cam Control, and I'm going to now link my camera to this null. And the point of moving the position is that it is not visible in the scene. Then you can press P and R to kind of move around in your scene. it makes it much easier when animating your scene. And this next step, you could use groups, but because I only need a couple of these extra floors, I'm going to just be duplicating them in the scene setup. So I'm going to click on this and Control and D to duplicate it. Then I'm going to press Shift and then move it in the X-axis. And by this, it moves in increments. I'm going to come back to the middle one again, Control and D, press Shift and move it in increments. There you go. I'm going to press OK. You can see it kind of made our floor cover our scene. Then I'm going to go back into the scene setup and change my HDRI environment map. I'm just going to use one of the default ones. So I'm going to come back into render settings, physical environment, and gonna click on show in background. So now you can see, and you can come down into rotate environment and rotate it in the y-axis if you want to slightly change that. We're gonna have a wall here, so most of this reflection is not gonna be seen. All right, and I also downloaded this wall, and I'm going to do the same exact method I used before to create a 3D model to import it into Element 3D. I have also downloaded a 3D model of a door. I will have a link in the description. This is the door. It was actually closed when it came, so all I did was separate the framing and the door itself and just kind of open it up a bit. So I'm gonna change it to rotation, press Shift again, rotate it 90 degrees, then move it back to around here. I'm also going to add some walls and also a small little room after the door. All right, so normal size again. I'm gonna rotate it and I'm gonna press Y again, bring it up. I'm gonna move it back and bring it to the side. I'm gonna duplicate it by Control and D, bring it to the other side. Then gonna add the textures the same way. So diffuse, grossness, the normal map, and the occlusion for this particular wall. So that's with the textures added. For this door, going to add some of the physical materials from here. So for the door hinge, I'm just gonna add the gold. And for the actual door, I just use a white material, and for the framing I just use plastic, so it's quickly done. Also, when you come back, you see the 3D models disappear. You can fix that by coming into the materials of that, come into settings and click on draw back faces, and you can do the same for the other ones if you'd like to, and for the models too. Then I'm going to duplicate this middle floor again, bring it back, and just going to duplicate this wall, move it into the middle, then bring it back so it creates a small little room to look through. Then I'm gonna press OK, see what we got. So I think it's time to work on our lighting. So first of all, I'm going to render settings, come into lighting. You can zero out the brightness multiplier, but this is going to be doing it automatically if you're just going to create a light. So I'm going to create a light by pressing Ctrl, Shift, Alt, and L. Create a spotlight. Have a cone angle of like 90. The cone feather could be 75. If you wanted to cast shadows, then I'm going to press P and A to move it into position. To have a better understanding where your light is, you can switch to T views and change the view for this to be on the left, for example. So you can see this is our door and this is where our light is, and you can just grab that and bring it there. I'm actually gonna press A twice and reduce the cone angle so it's slightly smaller. You can come into the front view and move it to the middle, depending of course where you want your light to be. Then I'm gonna click off of two views and come back to one view. I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion and have it as ray traced. Then I'm gonna reduce the physical environment to half, so 0.5, so it's a darker scene, as you can see. And one thing we can do to make it look much more realistic is as you can see, we have our reflections coming from our HDRI environment still showing up where there is a wall, so there shouldn't be any reflection coming up of a window. So I'm going to go back into the scene setup. So first of all, I'm going to create a new folder inside of the group folder. You can rename it to floor. Click on every single object that is the floor and drag them into the floor folder. Then come down into reflection and change the reflect mode to be mirror surface. Now this might make your viewport to be quite draggy. Then create a new folder and drag in all these other objects into the group folder and change the reflection mode to be spherical, and then click OK. You can see we got some holes here, so I'm just going to move back these two parts. So I'm going to click on these two walls and just bring them down slightly, and also move my three floors to slightly forward. So you get rid of that hole, then press OK. You can see it works much better. Now we can start working on our camera animation, and for that we can actually turn off ambient occlusion for now because we don't need it. It kind of speeds up our process. So I'm going to press P and R, so it comes up with position and orientation. Then create two keyframes, slightly go forward, start of a frame because we want to showcase the bloody footprints walking towards the door. Alright, and I'm just gonna move forward to maybe around 7 seconds and animate my camera going forward, as well as to tilt up to reveal the bloody handprints on the door. Then let's see what we got with our animation. Now this is what we got so far, just a slow pan up to reveal the door being either open or the bloody handprints. As you can see, our floor only starts here. To fix that, we can come back into Element 3D, duplicate this middle floor, press Shift again and move it back, and then press OK. With the camera, for now, we can also press A twice and check on depth of field. Now, of course, you want to be true to how a camera would work in real life. I'm gonna reduce the aperture to be around 10, maybe even 9. It just creates a more realistic depth of field. But we're going to turn this off in a second. This is just for us to review what it looks like. Alright, and now with the 3D scene finished in Element 3D, we can move on to adding the blood textures. Alright, and just before we move on to the blood, I actually want to do one slight adjustment, and that is here. I want to change the color of this floor to be different. You can do two things. You can either change the actual color of that tile. So if I go on that one, which is this one, and you can also speed up the process by coming into the floor and changing the reflection mode to default. It just speeds up your preview window. So coming back to this floor, we could come into the material, and you're going to need to duplicate the material, change it, because otherwise it would change your every single one. Come into the diffuse color and change the color to something slightly different, maybe just some darker, a little bit greenish, then press OK. It just kind of separates the two floors a little bit better, maybe slightly darker, something like that. Then change back the refraction mode to mirror surface for the floor and for the other objects to be spherical. There we go, then press OK. Alright, that's much better in my opinion. Then I'm also going to seed with the ambient occlusion turned on. You can also turn on the shadows and have it as ray traced. The actual HDRI won't cast any shadows, only your light, and because our light is facing downwards, there is no shadows to be shown. But in case your scene needs any shadows, this is what you have to turn on. Alright, so let's start adding blood. I'm going to come into the folder that includes all the blood textures, and note that the 5K version you have to pay a very small amount, but the 2.5K version is for completely free. And for these textures, even the 2.5K for a scene that is 1920 by 1080 is very much enough resolution. So in mind of that, let's continue. So first of all, I want to add my first footprint, and I want it to be quite a bit. So I'm going to start with this one, footprint number 3, drag it on top of everything, then make it into a 3D layer, press A twice and turn off accept lights. I'm going to scale it down to maybe around 2 should be fine. Then come back into Element 3D, go into Utilities and select it to the position of where you want this footprint to be. I want it to be around here, and then generate a 3D null. And this is going to have the position of this floor. Then once you have this, just press on P and copy the position of this null object into your bloody footprint. Then press R and rotate it slightly to match the perspective. You can also use these lines on the floor to align with your lines on your on the box of the layer. I'm gonna make it slightly smaller, maybe 1.7. slightly move it to the left. You can also see this would be a left foot, so you're gonna have to swap it. So again, in scale, deactivate the link property, and on the one on the very far left, add a minus sign, and this is going to flip it. And you want to change the blending mode to be overlay. And before I preview it, I'm going to press A twice and just get rid of the depth of field, because that really slows down your preview. And as you can see, it sticks perfectly to the floor. Alright, and now I'm going to use the same technique to add the rest of the blood elements. You can see by changing the blending mode to overlay, it interacts with the light much better. And as you can see, it almost creates a three-dimensional depth, having a lot of detail retained on the assets. Alright, so I've added some more elements to, this is another handprint that kind of shows maybe one of the person crawling with their hand. And then I want to talk about these three assets because they are slightly different. So this is from one of our premium packs called Blood Splatter, and because this doesn't include as sprayed assets as that paid pack, but you can also get these individually, so you can just get this one or both of these. For these, as these are MOVs, you have to freeze frame it by pressing right click, time, and freeze frame. Coming back to the composition, you can see I've just added more to add kind of more detail, as without smooth drops of blood it would look slightly empty. So these are also done just the same way as the other ones. And now I'm gonna go to the end of the shot. Then lastly, I'm going to add the final asset just in here behind this wall, and this is the only one that is done slightly differently, but to start with it's actually the same. So I'm going to come in here, generate a new point just on this floor, press generate. Then I'm going to bring in the asset. Let's use this blood smeared number 5. So I'm going to drag that down here, make it into a 3 layer, turn off accept lights. Gonna copy the position and change the scale to maybe around 4 or 5. Maybe 4 is better. I'm gonna press R, make it align with the floor, something like that. Maybe make it slightly bigger. All right, then move it slightly behind the wall. And an easy way to mask out the wall accurately is that duplicate your element 3 layer, bring it above your blood element layer. For now, I'm just gonna isolate it and change the output to be world position, and change the position of the Z matte. And you can, for this, as you want a harsh matte, you can just reduce the matte filter to 0 and go as far as the wall, maybe 260 for me. And now you can use this as a luma matte to mask out this wall in front of it. And for that, you need to come into track matte and luma matte inverted. There we go, so it's behind the wall now. Sometimes you need to also add edge smoothing to it to have it not so sharp. Then again, change the blending mode to overlay, and you can also color correct it slightly better by adding a curves adjustment. What also works is reducing the contrast, and you can easily do that with a brightness and contrast effect. You can take on use legacy and maybe by -10 or 15, and for whichever layer doesn't look good to you, you can also just color correct to blend in slightly better with the scene. Now let's move on to just that final grade, and for this I recommend using film convert. And to do that, I'm going to make a new adjustment layer and press Ctrl, Alt and Y, or come up to layer, new adjustment layer, press enter and change the name to grade temporary. Then search for film convert nitrate, drag it on top. I'm going to change the film stock to be this more green and white to it. Come down into color correction and slightly add more contrast. Not too much more because you don't want to crash your black and white. But this also helps a lot more just having that final look instead of something that looks more, something that was shot with log color profile. You can also add film grain to this. Alright, and to have that final touch, to remove that very perfect camera movement, I'm going to select everything by pressing Ctrl and A, then Ctrl Shift and C, or right click and pre-compose. Let's call this the final comp. Then I'm gonna add a new adjustment layer by pressing Ctrl Alt and Y, and you can add a transform effect and have scale in very slightly, maybe to 103. And once you scale it in, just Alt and left click on anchor point, type in wiggle and 0.5 comma maybe 30, and this is just gonna add a very slight movement so it's not so exactly straight. There it is, as you can see. You can also use this to kind of create a POV effect on your videos. And if you can see this moved down a little bit too far, you can add slightly more zoom to it, so 104. And finally, our last thing that is missing that we have to turn back on is our depth of field. So press A twice on your camera and turn on depth of field, and there it is. If this is too much depth of field, you can also change it with reducing your aperture. But this is the end of the tutorial, and I hope these blood textures will be helpful for you in your projects. Let me know in the comments what kind of tutorials you'd like to see next, and yes, thank you for watching. Bye.